Previously, we touched on the notion of you control your process or the process will control you. How will we know the difference? Can we revisit this idea?
Yeah, so writing process is how you write. So you have this idea, you have something, maybe it's a story idea, maybe it's a concept or a character, whatever it is, whatever your initial inspiration is, and it could be anything. And then you know what the finish line is. You want to end up with a script that has, great concept, great story, great characters. If it's a comedy, it's funny. If it's a thriller, it's right. So you're here and you want to get there. Now, how do you do that? And that's the process. What do you navigate toward? What do you do when you get stuck? When do you evaluate what you're writing and how do you evaluate? All of this is process. And novel writers are taught early on to develop and improve their process. Athletes, it's all about process. I had these two writers, and the minute they came into my class, I didn't know anything about them, but just like the first thing they asked me, I'm like, these writers are going to be superstars. And they did. These writers went on and they wrote an Academy Award winning film, All Quiet on the Western Front, which won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film, and they won the BAFTA for Best Screenplay, and they were not major writers. But I just knew by their question and their attitude. Now, I didn't get to know who they were for quite a while, but when I got to know who they were, it was obvious. Leslie is a world champion athlete. I forget, it's where you run a marathon and then you swim a marathon and bike, these incredible endurance competitions. I forget what it's called, but it's crazy. And she competes against the top people from all over the world. And as an athlete, what you learn is you got to start with your process. So if you want to be a professional golfer, you work on your golf swing for like a year, before you golf. My wife runs marathons, and I got inspired to try to run a marathon. And I was like training, and I'm like, God, I run slow. And I don't run that far because I get tired. So I had a friend who's a sports scientist. I go, should I work on my endurance or should I work on my speed? And he goes, neither. Work on your process. If you don't get your process right, you won't get speed or endurance. So it's like, work on your steps, your gait, how your foot strikes, and I'll help you with that. So that's how Leslie was programmed. And her husband and writing partner, Simon, was a world-renowned sports psychologist working with top athletes. So of course, they came in with this attitude of, can you help us refine our process? Can you get us stronger at process? Most everyone comes in focused on product or outcome. I know I did. When I was starting out, I wasn't like, can you help me with my process? I'm like, can you help me sell my script? Or how do I write a script? It's all about, I know what I want. I want to sell a script. I want to sit in a movie theater with people and watch it. I want to know I can make a living doing this. It's everything that I want. It's where I want to get to. But no one was telling me, here's the process to get there. So what's really important with writers is they have this process, and it's usually like automatic. It's not conscious. They're not really aware of it. So one of the things I do, especially when I work one-on-one with writers, is I slow them down. I ask them a lot of questions, and I want to know what their process is. So I might be working with someone, and their process is they've got to figure out the concept, and they got to figure out the story, and they got to have it mapped out before they write. And I might work with a different writer who's the opposite. They're like, I can't be thinking about the story until I know the characters. And I just spend a lot of time with the characters, and I just write and I write and I write and I write, and it just, hopefully the story will start to emerge. Okay, these are very different processes, right? So the writer who's got to work it all out before they write, I'm going to suggest an exercise or suggest they write a script where they don't do it that way, and they do it the opposite way. And I'm interested in how much pushback I get. And the writer said, oh, I can't do it that way. they're rigidly locked into this process. And this process is controlling them. The reality is, to control your process, when I work with a writer, it'll be, okay, so when you are gonna start from here and want to end up here, there's a lot of different processes you can use. Maybe based on that writer, I'll map out 7 different processes. So, we'll go for 2 extremes. One is you're gonna figure it all out story-wise, lock it down before you write it and stick to it. On the other end is you're just gonna dive in with certain prompts and write and explore and let the story start to reveal itself to you. But that's just 2. There's gonna be 5 other different processes. And what I always tell them is, I'm not smart enough to look at you right now and hear how you write and know which of these 7 or 10 process is going to be the best for you. And I don't think you're smart enough to know. I don't think we gravitate towards the process that is in our comfort zone, that plays to our strengths and maybe hides our weaknesses. So what I tell everybody is, if you want to work with me, I'm going to have you try out all these different processes. I'm dyslexic, so I have a problem with that word. And we're going to find out which of these processes, if that's the way you say it, creates your best product. Now, I don't have them write 7 or 10 scripts because that would take a very long time. So what I've done over the years is figured out a more contained writing exercise that they could do. And maybe it would be 2 weeks. So they could do, 7 of these in 14 weeks. And what's really interesting, I learned this the hard way, is I realized that if I have a writer and I have them try out these different processes, and then I let them decide which is their best pages. They're always going to pick the pages that were created by the process that's in their comfort zone that they like to do. And the pages they created with the process that was really scary or uncomfortable for them, they hate those pages. So when I worked with writers, I would, and I still do, I'll create a group and I'll say, okay, you're going to be trying out these different processes, and then you're going to be bringing in 15 pages with this process, and the group's going to read it and they're going to give you feedback on it. And what not always, but what often happens is the writer, they'll say, hey, can I talk to you before class? It's really important. I'm like, okay. And they're like, okay, so I like what you're saying. I think it's great. That's when they say that, they have a real problem with it, right? And they're like, so I agreed to do these different processes, and I did this one process, and I created these pages, and I know it's scheduled for people to read it today and give me feedback, but I'm not, no, trust me, these pages suck. This is embarrassing. I don't want anyone to read it. And I'm not mad at you, Corey, that you had me do this, which means they probably are, but lesson learned, this is not and I'm like, no, it's, you have to let everyone read it. And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, I can't force you, but I won't keep working with you. And so they're like, oh, all right. And what always happens is when people read it, they're like, oh my, I didn't know you were this amazing. This blows me away. And it's really interesting to watch the writer. Initially, they're really upset. No one wants to be told that you can't evaluate your own writing, but we have certain processes that it's just, we're comfortable and we're natural. Just like when you think about life, there's things we do on autopilot without really thinking about it, and we do it over and over and it becomes habitual. And some of those things are not necessarily the healthiest. Some of those things aren't always serving us. And it's important sometimes to have someone point it out and, in your life to go, oh, yeah, I always react this way in this situation, or I handle this in this way, but maybe there are other ways I could try. So I remember this one writer, Gary, I wish I had recorded this, but his, I was going to say wife, I think fiance at the time, who becomes his wife, she was a development executive at a big company. And so he wrote these pages using, so what I do is when I lay out the 7 processes, let's say for you, if I was working with you, I'd say, of these 7, like which one or 2 would you most want to do? Which one or 2 would you least want to do? Is there any one that you think, I don't think I could even do that process? Or is there a process that you think just kind of terrifies you? And then, depending on the person, how much courage they have, if they're like gung-ho courage, like they're down for this, we're going to start with the scariest one. If maybe they want to do this, but they need to ramp themselves up, we'll start with one of the easier ones. So for Gary, this particular process was the one he's like, I don't think I could do this. I'm terrified of it. But Gary is very, very courageous. So before I could say it, he goes, so I should probably start with that one. I'm like, I love it, Gary. I love you. Yeah. So he did it. And he's like, no one's going to read these pages. People read it. They loved it. And I remember he came up to me after can I talk to you? Can I talk to you after class? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, can you move me to a different group? I'm like, why? He goes, well, these people, they don't know what they're talking about. These people, they think it's great. It's not great, And I'm like, Gary, have you shown your fiance these pages? He goes, oh, no. Like, I don't think she'd be my fiance if she saw these pages. I'm like, oh, come on, he was like an insecure writer. He thought these pages were so terrible. Finally, I got him to show her the pages. And she like swacked him over the head and like, Gary, I didn't know you could write like this. How come you haven't been writing like this for, And she actually showed these pages to Brian Glazer at Imagine. And it was just like 15 pages. It wasn't even a script. And he showed it to Imagine. They loved it so much. They brought Gary in and they're like, we want to work with you. And the point is, he would never have shown anyone these pages. So our habitual process of how we start a project, what we navigate toward, how we evaluate it, what we think is good or not good, we do this on autopilot over and over, and it just becomes reality. And that means that process is controlling us. To control your process, you have to first say, there's other ways I could do this. There's other ways that writers go about doing this. You have to first accept that there's different paths, there's different processes. That I have found to be a pretty easy thing to get writers to see. The next one, not so easy to get certain writers to see, which is this process that you're using, maybe it's the best process. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's a better process, and the only way to know is to experiment and try different processes out. Half the writers are like, yeah, let's do it. The other half writers are really resistant to that. And so if you really accept the fact that I can always go back to this way that I work, and the more someone says, I have to work this way, or this is the way you do it, this is the way everyone does it, this is the way you should do it, they're really locked into this mindset. They're really locked into this. Now, if they're really lucky, the process they're locked into is a process that allows them to create great scripts. I've seen that. If you're lucky enough that this default process really works for you, that's great. But it's rare, because usually the default process, it plays to your strengths and it hides your weaknesses, and it's not your best material. And so you have to try different processes to find the one that's best for you. And often, not always, but often it's one of the processes that the writer is most resistant to doing or most terrified to do is the one that allows them to write their best material. Not always, but it is so common that when I work with a writer, I definitely insist that they're going to try the process or two they're most terrified of, or the ones they most are confident won't work for them. I'm going to make them try it. If they try that and it's like, yeah, this process really didn't work for me, and the pages confirm that, okay, great, cross them off the list. But I don't know if I had to put 70% of the time, one of those process, that's the promised land. That is going to get you the life as a writer that you most want.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.